Viene ahora Francis Tseng, es un programador, está haciendo algo interesante. Todos nosotros conocemos lo que son las comunidades online y, bueno, y ese riesgo que hay, ¿no? De que el comentario incorrecto genera una batalla campal. Yo cuando a veces me despierto de muy buen humor, entro a ver los comentarios de La Nación y ahí es como, bueno, siento la realidad. Francis trabaja en un proyecto que se llama Coral Project, que es Mozilla, New York Times y Washington Post, desarrollando software que permita a comunidades online desarrollarse en un ambiente protegido, como un coral. La idea es el coral, como el coral en el mar, que crece la vida ahí protegida de los bichos grandes. Es muy interesante porque van a ver la presentación. Ahora es muy interesante que están evaluados como distintos métodos. Los problemas básicamente son los conocidos. Hay problemas, bueno, las personas son los que dicen ser, cómo hay que moderar, cuánto hay que moderar, las cosas que están diciendo las personas son verdad. A veces es importante para algunas comunidades, a veces no es importante para otras comunidades. Y después los distintos sistemas de moderación van haciendo cosas que, bueno, por un lado a veces matan a los trolls y eso está bien, pero por otro lado achatan un sitio porque, bueno, las opiniones menos populares o los autores con ideas menos populares pasan a quedar como relegados. Entonces hay que tunear, digamos, cómo son los algoritmos, cómo son las moderaciones. No es que hay una solución que sirve para todos y las comunidades son distintas, pero ellos están agarrando el problema entero y viendo cómo pueden hacerlo andar para organizaciones grandes como, bueno, New York Times o Washington Post, o comunidades mucho más chicas. Así que los dejo con Francis. Muy interesante la charla.
Thank you. So my original talk was titled Learning About Machine Learning, and I've changed topics. So today I'll be talking about designing digital communities. If you're interested in machine learning, I am leading a workshop tomorrow at noon around machine learning, so please join me for that. But it's been great to see a lot of the previous speakers kind of touch upon the importance of community in journalism, which is something that is overlooked at a lot of organizations, so it's really encouraging to see there's more focus there. So a little bit about me, I'm a designer and developer. I'm currently a 2015 Knight Mozilla Open News Fellow at the Coral Project, which is a joint venture between the Times and the Washington Post and Mozilla to develop open source software essentially to make digital community easier for news organizations. So as for some of the motivations, a lot of people have already spoken about how community can be useful in the journalism process. So I'll be covering a little bit of that again. But generally, commenting is where my interest lies. And it's right now the most dominant form of community interaction on news sites, although it's sort of disappearing. A lot of places are closing comments down and so on. But there's still a whole lot of potential there. So you can mine comment sections for sources, for experts, for follow-ups, for news stories, get an idea of how your audiences react to certain things and so on. And I think the most important thing is to get people talking to each other about new topics, opening up new kind of discourses and stuff, which is sort of like the holy grail of commenting and almost never seen. And so there are a lot of problems with commenting that I'm sure most of you have experienced, probably yourself, or have just seen. And there are a few broad categories that I would classify them as. Probably the most visible is the problem of moderation or dealing with the kind of toxicity online. So trolls, essentially, people who are sort of out there to disrupt other people's conversations or just directly attack other people. Reputation, so this is tied into that. So how do you measure sort of how good someone is at participating in the community in a sort of positive and productive sense? Related to that, identifying quality contributions. So how do you know when a submission is good? How do you know if it's something that the community will value at large? Another one that happens a lot is just a sort of dead zone one. This is a little less interesting, but how do you actually get it so that people are talking to each other? So you'll see a lot of comment sections where commenters kind of come in and they just kind of drop their opinion and then they don't actually talk to anyone else. They never come back to the site. So how do you avoid that? And then verification. So how do you know that people are who they say they are, that experts actually know what they're talking about, that people offering personal anecdotes have actually legitimately experienced that and aren't just making things up? Because a lot of people make stuff up online. And then scalability. So I'll go into that a little bit more as well. So whether or not there's solutions for any of these problems, it's really hard to say. I don't think there are any hard and fast ones or one-size-fits-all ones. But there are a lot of really interesting approaches that have been around for even, some of them for like 10, 20 years that I think are overlooked. So in terms of moderation, the main concerns are, how does the moderation reflect the community's values? So a lot of sites will have moderators that aren't appointed by communities. For instance, like Facebook, they'll hire external staff to sort of moderate things based on a set of rules. And whether or not that necessarily reflects, say, the values of a Facebook group or something, or the general sort of conversation on Facebook or other sites is an open question. And so the other side of that is, how do you prevent moderators from becoming abusers? So you'll see this a lot in sites like Reddit and so on, where the moderators do come from the community, yet over time this friction starts to develop, and then there's a lot of accusations of people being silenced and so on. So how do you avoid that kind of dynamic? So some of the more interesting approaches, one is distributed moderation. So having a jury-like moderation system, this is seen in Slashdot, for instance, where accounts satisfying a really basic criteria, if you're in the 90% oldest accounts, you have a chance of randomly being selected to moderate for a short period of time. And so this is great because it sort of distributes moderation, so you don't necessarily have to hire moderators. Everyone sort of has the opportunity to assert what they feel are the community's values, and it's a fairly public process too. There's a video game called League of Legends. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. That has a really interesting system that's similar, called the Tribunal, in which when players are reported for abuse, so for deliberately losing a game or just like being really mean to other players, they can get reported. And other games that have this feature, when a player is reported, it goes through the staff or something, and there's some formal process by which a person is punished or not punished. League of Legends, what they do is, if someone's reported in a game, they have a system that will automatically compile a sort of a case file against them, and that case is put in what's called the Tribunal, and then any player can come and look at the case and decide whether or not they think this person was in the wrong or not, and they have some sort of involvement in what kind of punishment is given, or like the severity of it. So it's sort of like a crowdsourced justice system. It's pretty cool. Another form of distributed moderation is seen in Kinja, which is Gawker's commenting system, where basically if you start a thread, you moderate your own thread. That can be problematic in some ways because if the thread parent is sort of not interested in actually having discussion, then they can easily prevent that. And then there are other systems like meta moderation in Slashdot, which is also quite interesting. So if you describe this sort of jury-like system to people, some people will be like, well, what if some people are just like get picked and all they want to do is mess things up and just sort of screw up the system? So meta moderation sort of exists to prevent that. So you also have the chance of being selected as a moderator of moderators. So for a little while, you can look at past moderation decisions and say whether or not you agree with them, and that sort of filters out people who don't moderate in good faith. And then another part is moderating for rehabilitation. So many moderation systems are about shutting people out of the site, so banning them or silencing them, shadow banning them, and so on. But again, League of Legends has a really interesting philosophy here. Their player behavior team, which is in charge of developing these moderation systems, they don't want to shut people out because those are players which are valuable to them that could be playing their game. And so what they do is they design their system so that people don't get shut out, but rather they get rehabilitated. They find ways of reintegrating them into the community in such a way that they start to participate in a positive way. And one way that they do this is they have these things called reform cards, where when someone gets banned for something or gets punished for something, right, they clearly communicate what community norms or rules they violated and why. And they also have a forum in which users can also express why they disagreed with this person's behavior too. And so hearing it from the people that they consider peers, hearing their disapproval is a really powerful force in sort of getting people to realize why they were wrong and compel them to change their behavior. Yeah, so these are some of the responses from people who did go through this system, and they're like, I feel so bad at what I've done, I'm going to improve my behavior and so on. So it's pretty encouraging results. Next is reputation. So here the main concerns are, how do you measure a user's standing within the community, and what effects do reputation have on a user? So by the last point, I mean a lot of systems have like Stack Overflow, for instance, where the longer you participate in the community, the more features you have. So soon you can start editing other people's posts and so on. And so a big question is, what kind of new capabilities come with greater reputation? So the most common way of measuring user reputation is by their contribution quality. So you'll see this on systems like Reddit, where they have a point-based system that they call karma. And when you submit a comment or another piece of content, people can upvote it or downvote it. And that is essentially your reputation, that number. But that takes time to build. Another interesting idea out there is by porting it over from other trusted services. So you'll see this now in a lot of these new e-commerce sites that are built on Bitcoin and the blockchain. And they want to essentially say, okay, you've proven yourself to be a trusted merchant, say on eBay, so why can't we bring some of that reputation over to these other e-commerce sites? So you kind of bootstrap reputation across networks. And in terms of what reputation confers, in terms of abilities or sort of powers, I guess, on the site, I would say it's better to prioritize expressive tools over tools that give more control over other users. So a lot of times you're awarded with moderation abilities, right? You can delete other people's posts or so on. But I think that goes a little bit too far, and it's better to actually just give them access to more ways of contributing to the site and not necessarily shutting other people down. And then another interesting idea is local trust. So on sites like Reddit or pretty much any site, right, you have a global reputation. Everyone sees the same number for you. But in a lot of these Bitcoin-based market sites, they have a really interesting idea where every metric of reputation is person to person. So I may trust you more than I trust someone else, but someone else may trust them less. So it's like, it's not a global score anymore, it's a local score. Contribution quality concerns are, how do you measure the quality of a user's contribution, and how do you do so clearly? So again, Reddit and many other sites just have an upvote downvote system. But that's a really noisy signal because it's really hard to know what someone means by an upvote or a downvote. Reddit, for example, has these explicit rules that no one really follows, but it says that upvotes and downvotes are not meant to, or rather downvotes are not meant for disagreement, therefore if someone's not participating sort of the way they should be participating in a conversation, but of course everyone uses it because they disagree with someone. So in practice, none of these systems ever work as intended. So how do you do this without making it a game, right? So there's a really cool law called Goodhart's law, where when a measure becomes a target, it's easy to become a good measure, because then people start optimizing their behavior directly for that measure, as opposed to for what the measure was intended to measure. So Slashdot has explicit signaling to get around this sort of ambiguity of votings. So you can say if it was funny, insightful, toxic, or so on. A lot of interesting ideas around measuring comments based on discussion quality, not the comment itself. So you can see what kind of comments have followed that comment and measure the whole thread together. So I'm going to kind of rush through the rest. But this is a really interesting visualization of Reddit comments. So brighter orange means higher voted, and the purplish color means downvoted. So you can kind of see there's these structures that come out, these patterns, and you can sort of rate the thread based on what that structure looks like. So this one, there's a big troll at the top, so it's all downvoted at the top, and then there are people who kind of come in and, I don't know, battle the troll or whatever, that get a lot of upvotes. Verification, so how do you verify experts? How do you verify that personal anecdotes are genuine? And how do you verify that someone is who they say they are? So the simplest form is submission of proof to the site moderators, but a more interesting one is in-person events. So this benefits sort of community building in general, but then everyone kind of meets each other and they can together verify each other. Trust networks, where you essentially vouch that someone is who they say they are, and if you're trusted, then that counts as trusting them. Leveraging, again, identity on other sites. So if someone tweets on one site that they are who they say they are on this other site, then that counts as verification. So dead zone, not really engaging with the content, no one's really talking to each other. How do you avoid that? A really simple thing, so this was lacking on the Times site, and I don't actually know if they've implemented yet, but notifications. So on the Times site, if you post a comment and someone responds, you don't know, so no one ever comes back and continues the conversation. So this is just like a really low-hanging fruit that I think more sites can integrate. And then finally, scalability. So a lot of these problems are much easier if the community is small. If you're dealing with 50, 100, couple hundred people, a lot of these problems don't even show up. But as soon as you start to get large, they become sort of untenable. And so how do you deal with these problems at scale, and how do you do so with limited staff and resources? Because not everyone can afford a whole moderation team. So the trend that we're seeing more of now is automation, so auto-moderation and these other systems. I think Twitter somewhat recently started doing that with machine learning to try and catch bad tweets before they have to be reported. But it's really tricky to get right. There's a lot of things that fall through the cracks. The other interesting one is deputizing the community. So again, pulling people out of the community and then sort of giving them moderator status or other ways of contributing at a higher level. And the other one is just breaking up the big group into smaller groups. So Reddit has with subreddits. I think Facebook has this with Facebook groups. I think MSNBC has this with discussion groups. That seems quite successful. So that way you're not managing one large group, but you're managing many smaller groups. That's it. Thank you.